Good morning on this beautiful Monday morning here in the fall. And I'm Pete Najarian. This is The Take for Market Rebellion. What a wild ride we had last week. We talked about volatility all throughout the week, and we continue to talk about volatility and what's really going on within the markets. Now, also, you must understand, it isn't just where did we start and where did we end? There's all of the in between. And what I mean by that is the volatility of the between the bells, the opening and the closing bell. That's been extraordinary. And we've been talking about that for a while now. And that's why we are seeing the volatility index still holding up very strong. And actually on some days moving to the upside, even on up days or down days or days where the bell to bell close was not a huge difference. There's a lot going on in between the bell. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now across the board. So we go back to Thursday. Yes, extremely volatile bell to bell, no doubt about it. Friday, obviously, two major storylines. The president, of course, and the first lady being diagnosed with COVID. That was a monster story, of course. And we still had to deal with job growth, the disappointment there, and what are the hopes for a stimulus package? So the combination of all these various stories certainly being thrown at the markets. And with that, we are seeing some incredible moves within the markets on a daily basis. So early on, we were down about 450 points, a pretty big push to the downside, but would Mnuchin and Pelosi be able to come up with some sort of a deal? And that certainly was something that started to move the markets. The idea that maybe they could, maybe they'd be able to work something out. Before you know it, we had a massive recovery in the Dow and in the S&P, not so much in the NASDAQ. As a matter of fact, the NASDAQ continued to get beat up pretty strong throughout the day. It was down about 200 points still as we were watching the rest of the different indices start to recover. So what was really getting hit and why was the market down 200 points in terms of the NASDAQ? Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, you get the idea. The really big names, the big market cap names, certainly getting a push to the downside, and that's going to bring down the market. Cisco throw in there, Adobe throw it in there. Shoot, you could throw in Salesforce as well. So a lot of different areas. So when you look at the semiconductors down about 2.25%, you look at technology down about 2%, you look at biotech getting hit as well, that all sort of spells it out in terms of what was really going on in the NASDAQ. Energy, it flipped. It had been moving around. So that was something that was pretty interesting. Some of those beta names really having a pretty nice reaction to the upside. Chevron moving to the upside along with ConocoPhillips. But as I say, some of those beta names, they really can move very, very rapidly. And we're talking about some of those names that have been hit so hard that their dollar amount has really pushed down as well. And we are seeing some of that movement in some of those names, whether it's an Occidental or a Halliburton or whatever, take your pick. Those names have definitely been some of the names that are moving up at an extreme pace at times and down at just as big of a pace. So how did we actually finish the final 30 minutes of the day? Because we talk about this all the time, and the theme of 2020 has been volatility and the late day movements that we have been seeing within the markets. And we certainly continue to see a lot of that. Matter of fact, you look at the Dow, it actually dropped another 120 some odd points the final 30 minutes of the day, finished down 134 points. So most of the losses of the day really coming in that final half hour after recovering. So finished down about 0.5%. Not a big deal as far as the Dow, but the NASDAQ, on the other hand, finished down to 250 points, dropped about 60 points in the final half hour or so, finishing down a little over 2%. So a pretty ferocious move to the downside that held on throughout most of the day, as a matter of fact. You had those leaders that I talked about. You also could throw in Tesla. You had the semiconductors. You had the biotechs. You had the Netflix of the world as well. That combination of names and market cap names that were pushing and pulling directly on the NASDAQ certainly had a huge influence. Now, we got up near 30 for the volatility index yesterday or on Friday, but we were still holding somewhere, call it somewhere 27.5, that sort of a range. We did have volume, and boy, did we ever have volume. We talked about, we'd been seeing a little bit of a pullback, nothing major, a little bit of a pullback, some blips here and there. Volatility certainly adding to that, but volume, 31.8 million contracts on Friday. So certainly some huge option paper. We were seeing a lot of that. Apple traded about 2 million contracts, Tesla about 1.3 million. Then you look at American Airlines and NEO, they're both somewhere around that 500,000 or more mark. So that was some pretty strong movement and volumes that were hitting into those areas, no doubt about it. Once again, of course, Apple being the leader, which is not something unusual at all. As a matter of fact, if they're not the leader, that's actually pretty unusual. So you go through the weekend, all the news, you've seen all the stories, we've watched the president in the hospital. We've watched him riding around the car. We've seen all these various things. Potential that he might even get checked out today and leave the hospital and get back over to the White House. So all of that sort of in play right now, but certainly seeing markets that are having a pretty nice recovery. Matter of fact, in the pre-market, we were up about 200 points on the Dow, about 90 points on the NASDAQ, call it 20 plus points on the S&P. We get in the early part of the session here. We're only 30 minutes in now. 15 or 20 minutes into the session, we're up about 270. We're up about 110 on the NASDAQ, about 30 on the S&P. Right now, we're still holding very, very close to that, although the Dow has come back down a little bit. Right now, 30 minutes in, we're about 200 points to the upside. So a pretty nice recovery from where we were on Friday. But we're really seeing a push. Now 150 points on the NASDAQ. So really nice rally coming from the NASDAQ. And that was what was getting hit so hard, as I mentioned on Friday. So certainly seeing a much faster recovery out of that than we are on the Dow itself. So VIX, pretty interesting to see a volatility index that's trading up. Now it's up only 4%. It was up closer to 8% early on, but still 4% move to the upside on a day where we've been positive pre-market and since the bell. So certainly that's something that really does stand out as well. Pushing closer and closer to call it 29. We're just underneath those 29 levels now. So it's interesting to see because, as we say all the time, it's not just what people seem to want to call the fear index. It's the movement index. It's telling you how much the S&P is going to be moving on a daily basis. So certainly that's something that I think is, if you look at it right now, very, very accurate. It's extremely accurate. As a matter of fact, S&P right now on about a 1% move. And the movement that we will see throughout the day certainly adds to that as well. So when we look and we see what's really working right now, I would say financials, they look pretty strong right out of the gate. They were, matter of fact, almost every single category you could find, you were seeing green. But financials certainly stood out for me. JP Morgan, Citi, Capital One, US Bank, some of those next level banks, PNC as well. Wells Fargo, a big rally today relative to their peers, as a matter of fact, on a big, strong move. You've got the biotechs as well, up a little over 2%, a nice, strong move. Gilead, Regeneron, a lot of that makes sense because of what's been going on over the last weekend, especially with the president and so forth. Energy, a nice big bounce as well. The OIH up more than 3% today. Those beta names, as I say, when we're moving to the downside, boy, those beta names can hurt. Moving to the upside, boy, they sure can look pretty nice when you're looking at stocks that are up 2 and 3 and 4 and 5% in a single day. Very frequent, some very, very wild rides. There's no doubt about it on the energy side. Now, technology, even with the markets moving pretty nice, as I mentioned with the NASDAQ, technology is really not as much of the big powering move as we are in some of the other areas. When I say that, what I mean is within the NASDAQ, it's not just tech guys, it's the semiconductors, which sometimes we fold into tech, but it's the semis when you look at that. And take a look at biotech. Biotech has been very strong. By the way, materials looking pretty strong today as well. So across the board, wherever you want to turn, you're finding green. But the semiconductors up a little over 1.5%. That's been a nice, solid sort of a recovery after we'd seen a pretty good push down and a pullback period. Very, very short-lived, but some of those days pushing to the downside significantly. So the big news story of the day, I would have to say it's got to be Bristol-Myers. Now, we talk about the various names in the healthcare world all the time, and we've got Merck, and we've got Pfizer, and we've got all these various names, and obviously Bristol-Myers. Bristol-Myers, even though it's considered pharmaceutical, you got to put it in the biotech because they have bought. Their acquisitions in biotech have been massive over the years. And add one more to it, a $13 billion deal for Myocardia Inc. Now, obviously by the name, heart-related, so heart therapies and so forth. A 61% premium. Now that says a lot. Now that certainly is influencing, I think, today what you're seeing happening. As I mentioned, biotech looking pretty strong. I think that's what you're seeing there is, are there more acquisitions? That's always the question when you see a big market cap name go down, somebody buying it rather. And when I say go down, that's no longer going to be with themselves. Now they're going to be underneath Bristol-Myers when they do close the deal. But that's a $13 billion deal. That's a heck of a good size chunk that we're seeing out of that. And we've seen that out of Bristol-Myers. They have not been afraid to buy huge dollar amounts in the past. And once again, just adding to that. So I talked about the financials being one of the areas that did stand out for me. And the reason I say that is we see the financials and can they ever put those back-to-back days? We talk about it all the time. It has not been there. But you keep an eye on that XLF where we talked for a long period of time throughout the summer where it seemed as if the XLF was just sort of stuck somewhere near 25, a little higher, a little lower, but somewhere near 25. Well, what we are seeing right now is an XLF that needs to recover to get even back to that 25 level. That's how far down that had gotten pushed. So sticking with the financials, I got some unusual for you. I'm going to throw it. And now this is a little bit of a side financial, not a bank, but nonetheless, a name that's been really standing out and a name that's really been performing extremely well, Square. Now, SQ, the symbol there, stock trading about 171.80. And at that time, we started to see some buyers step in. 3,500 of this Friday, October 9th, this Friday expiring calls to 175s. They started buying in them, I call it close to $4 because it was the $3.90, somewhere in that range. Call it $4. They finished buying around $6. Stock started moving immediately. Now, a lot of the time people will say to me, well, why is the stock moving so fast, Pete? What happened? Why does the stock go from 171.80 all the way up towards 175 like that? Sometimes you got to let a little bit of that dust sort of settle because what's happening there oftentimes, as a guy who was a trader on the trading floor for a very long period of time, I can tell you, if I'm having to sell those calls, I'm standing in the trading pit, that makes me short. Now, short what? I'm short against the stock at that point in time. So my hedge, if I'm a floor trader, my hedge would be, if I can't find another option, I'm going to have to hedge with stock. So as you're reaching to buy those stock as the other side of the trade, as others are coming in to buy, somebody is there. Now, people always say this to me, and I want to clarify this as well. People will say to me, hey, Pete, there are buyers. Well, then somebody had to sell. Well, that's true. But the reality oftentimes is the sellers are oftentimes some of the professionals that are out there, whether it's the banks or whomever it might be. At the time, I was a specialist on the trading floor, standing down in those pits, sweating and yelling and screaming and doing all that, arm gesturing and all the rest of that. But somebody is going to hedge that trade. And that's just part of what we all do as traders, whether or not it's a bank themselves or traders individually, whatever the case may be. But if you're a market maker, you are hedging these trades. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. So oftentimes when you see big buyers coming in and buying chunks of something, you've got to hedge that, and you've got to do it very quickly. You've got to figure out where you want to get that hedge. If you can't find it in the options, you go to the stock. You immediately start buying stock, and maybe you even buy a little bit more stock than you need. Stock starts to move at a really rapid pace to the upside because those that are hedging are buying that other side. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. Either way, if it doesn't, you got to get educated. That's why we do what we do. It's why we follow the smart money. We love what we do, but you've got to be educated. You've got to understand all of the different nuances of what goes on, and you definitely need to understand exactly what's going on in the derivatives world. That's the growth. I just mentioned 31.8 million contracts, guys, traded on Friday. We starting off strong today, so we will see another strong day, I would suspect, by the end of the day in terms of some of these volumes. At least 25 million or more would be my call right now, based upon just what I see in the first 40 minutes of trade. A lot of activity out there, a lot of movement, and a market that right now I'm going to finish up with a market that's up 240 points on the Dow, 1%. A NASDAQ that's up 157 points, 1.4%. Or an S&P that's up 33 points, or 1%. Some really, really nice move. Oh, and by the way, yes, volatility index still trading not far off of 29, which is also up about 4%. So a very, very active, interesting day. Folks, I hope you understand what I'm talking about. If not, definitely get and look with the Market Rebellion, folks. Our education team is the best in the business. Have a great day of trading.